The sun was sinking low over the wide plains of New Mexico, painting the sky with deep orange and purple colors. The wind moved through the dry grass, and the sound of a horse's hooves echoed softly across the land. A cowboy named Jake Turner rode alone, his hat pulled low and his coat dusty from miles of travel. He had been on the trail for days, moving from one small town to another looking for work and quiet places to rest his heart. Jake wasn't the kind of man who spoke much. His eyes carried stories of hard years and things he didn't like to talk about. That evening, as the light started to fade, he noticed something unusual in the distance. A thin line of smoke was rising against the golden sky. Jake slowed his horse and studied it carefully. Smoke in this part of the desert could mean trouble, maybe a campfire left burning or a wagon caught in an accident. He hesitated for a moment, then turned his horse toward it. His heart told him that someone might need help. The ride was rough. The ground was uneven, scattered with rocks and dry bushes. When he finally reached the spot, his eyes caught sight of a broken wagon, its wheels half buried in the sand. One side of it was burned, and a horse was trapped under the weight of a wooden beam, kicking weakly. The air smelled of smoke and ash. Near the wreck, a young native woman was struggling to lift the heavy beam with her bare hands. Her face was streaked with dirt, her long black hair tangled from the wind, but her spirit looked unbroken. Jake jumped down from his horse and rushed to her side. "Let me help," he said quickly. The woman turned to him sharply, her dark eyes filled with anger and mistrust. "You would do what most white men do," she said in a hard voice. "Pretend to help, then take what is not yours." Jake froze for a second. Her words hit him like a slap, but he didn't argue. Instead, he dropped to one knee beside the horse and began using his rope to move the beam. His silence surprised her. Most men would have argued back, but Jake only worked quietly, focused on saving the animal. The woman stood there watching him, her chest rising and falling fast, unsure what to think. With a firm pull and the strength of his shoulders, Jake lifted the heavy beam just enough for the horse to slide free. The animal stumbled to its feet, snorted, and ran off into the open desert, dust flying behind it. Jake wiped the sweat from his face and looked at the woman. "There," he said softly, his voice calm. "It's free." The woman's expression softened for a moment, then hardened again. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "That horse wasn't yours." Jake gave a half smile. "Didn't belong to anyone once it was dying." He walked to his horse, checking the saddle straps, ready to move on. But the woman stepped forward. "Wait," she said. "You came all this way. Why?" Jake shrugged. "Smoke in the distance usually means someone's in trouble." She stared at him for a long time, trying to understand this quiet man who didn't talk like the others she'd met. "My name is Tala," she said finally. "My people's camp is a day's ride from here." Jake nodded. "You can't go on foot. The night will be cold." He pointed at his horse. "I'll take you as far as I can." Tala crossed her arms, her chin lifted proudly. "I do not need a man to guide me." Jake looked around. The sun had already dropped behind the hills, and a deep chill was moving through the air. "You may not need me," he said, "but the coyotes out there won't care about pride." She frowned, her eyes scanning the horizon. The truth was she was tired and hurting from the accident. Finally, she gave a small nod. "Only until sunrise," she said firmly. Jake helped her mount behind him, and they started across the open land. The sky turned darker, and the first stars appeared. The ride was silent at first, just the sound of the horse's steady rhythm and the whisper of wind. Tala sat stiffly, keeping distance even as she held on to the saddle for balance. After a while, Jake spoke. "What were you doing out here alone?" Tala hesitated before answering. "I was bringing medicine back to my people. My uncle was sick. I took a short path through the canyon, but the wagon wheel broke and the fire started from a spark." Jake nodded slowly. "You're lucky you made it out." She gave a sharp laugh. "Luck? My people don't believe in luck. We believe in strength." Jake didn't reply. He respected her spirit. He had seen many strong people lose everything and still stand tall. Something in her tone reminded him of his own mother, who had raised him after his father left. As they rode on, the wind carried the sound of night animals. An owl called from far away, and a coyote answered. Tala glanced back once, then whispered a short prayer in her language. Jake heard her soft words but didn't interrupt. He respected silence. It often said more than words ever could. When the moon rose high, they reached a small ridge. Jake stopped and pointed to a dry creek below. "We'll camp there, safer by the rocks." Tala slid off the horse, her legs weak. She tried not to show it, but Jake noticed her limp. He gathered some dry branches and lit a small fire. The light flickered gently on their faces. He pulled out a piece of bread and jerky from his saddlebag and handed some to her. "I have my own food," she said coldly. "I figured," Jake replied, tearing a piece for himself. "But it's rude to eat alone when someone's hungry nearby." Tala's lips twitched as if she wanted to smile but stopped herself. After a few minutes, she took the food without saying thank you. The fire crackled and the stars looked brighter than ever. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Jake leaned back on a rock, his hat over his eyes, and Tala sat with her knees pulled close, watching the flames. She was thinking about what she had said to him earlier. "You would do what most white men do." It echoed in her mind, but something about Jake didn't fit that image. He didn't talk much, didn't boast, and didn't look at her the way others had. Finally, she asked quietly, "Why are you alone?" Jake tilted his hat back slightly. "Some folks are better off that way," he said. Then after a pause, he added, "I worked ranches for years. Saw men treat others bad. Decided I'd rather ride alone than be part of that." Tala nodded slowly. There was honesty in his voice that she couldn't ignore. She looked at the fire again and whispered, "My people say the land tests every heart. Maybe it's testing yours too." Jake smiled faintly. "Could be," he said. The night deepened and the fire burned low. Tala's head dropped slightly as sleep started to take her. Jake kept watch, eyes scanning the dark horizon for movement. He thought about her words, about how people saw him because of his skin or his hat, and about how little that really mattered out here in the wild. As the wind cooled, he quietly placed his coat near her shoulders so she wouldn't shiver. He didn't say a word. He just looked at the stars, thinking about how strange it was that two people so different could end up sharing the same fire in the middle of nowhere. When Tala woke before dawn, she found the cowboy sitting on a rock, watching the horizon turn pink with light. She looked at the coat around her shoulders and then at him. "You didn't have to," she said softly. "I know," Jake replied with a small smile, "but it was cold." Tala studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said quietly, "Maybe you are not like most men after all." Jake tipped his hat and looked toward the rising sun. "Maybe," he said, "but I'm still just a man trying to do what's right." The first rays of morning light spread across the land as they mounted the horse again. Neither of them knew what the road ahead would bring, but both felt something had changed between them. The desert was still wild and lonely, but for the first time it didn't feel empty. The morning air was cool and quiet as the first rays of the sun spread across the endless New Mexico plains. The desert seemed peaceful, but Jake Turner knew how quickly that peace could turn into danger. He tightened the straps on his horse's saddle and looked at Tala, who stood beside him, her long dark hair catching the golden light. She didn't speak much, and neither did he, but there was something different between them now, a quiet respect that hadn't been there the night before. Tala adjusted the small bundle she carried, a pouch of dried herbs and medicine wrapped in cloth. Her uncle's life depended on her bringing it home. Her ankle was still sore from the wagon accident, but she refused to show pain. When Jake noticed her limp, he said, "You should ride. It'll make the travel easier." Tala frowned. "I can walk." Jake gave her a calm look. "You're strong, no doubt about that. But strength also means knowing when to rest." For a moment, she said nothing. Then, without another word, she climbed onto the horse. Jake led the reins as they started riding east toward her village. The sky grew brighter, the light shimmering over distant hills. The land around them was both beautiful and unforgiving. Dry riverbeds, tall red rocks, and scattered cactus that looked like old soldiers standing guard. They passed the burned remains of the wagon from the night before, now cold and silent. Tala didn't look back. Her people believed the past should stay behind you or it would slow your spirit. As they rode, Jake tried to break the silence. "How far is your village?" Tala looked toward the horizon. "By the river that bends like a snake. A day's ride if the weather stays kind." Jake nodded. "Then we'll make good time." For a while, only the sound of the horse's hooves and the wind filled the air. The rhythm was steady, comforting. Jake noticed how Tala kept her back straight, her eyes alert. She wasn't just watching the trail, she was reading the land. Every rustle, every shadow meant something to her. "You know this land well," he said. Tala gave a small smile. "The land speaks if you listen. It tells you where danger hides and where water sleeps beneath the sand." Jake looked ahead, thoughtful. I guess I've never listened close enough. Maybe your people don't know how, she said softly, though not unkindly. He chuckled. Maybe so. By midday, the sun burned high in the sky. They stopped near a group of flat stones to rest the horse. Jake pulled out his canteen and offered it to her. She hesitated, remembering her words from the night before. You would do what most white men do. But she saw the honesty in his eyes. Slowly she accepted it, taking a small sip before handing it back. Thank you, she said quietly. Jake nodded. You're welcome. They sat under the shade of a lone tree eating small pieces of bread and jerky. Tala opened her pouch of herbs and began grinding a few with a stone, mixing them with water to make a paste. Jake watched her work. What's that for? He asked. For the ankle, she said. The earth gives medicine if you know where to look. Jake admired her calm hands and how sure she seemed. You could teach a doctor or two, he said. Tala smiled faintly, almost laughing. Doctors don't listen to my kind. They think we know nothing. Jake looked down, embarrassed. Not all think that way. She tilted her head. Maybe not. But enough do. There was no anger in her voice and only truth. And Jake respected that. He realized how different their worlds were, how much she had learned to guard herself from disappointment. When they continued their ride, the land began to change. The soft plains turned into rocky hills and the air grew heavier with heat. A hawk circled above them, its cry echoing across the canyon walls. Jake stopped suddenly, raising his hand. Tala looked at him. What is it? Riders, he said, pointing toward a cloud of dust in the distance. They waited. Within minutes, 2 men on horseback appeared, both armed, their faces rough from the sun. Traders, maybe, or drifters. Jake's eyes narrowed. He'd met their kind before, men who looked for easy trouble. The men stopped a few yards away. One called out, What have we got here? A cowboy and his lady? His tone was mocking. Tala stiffened but said nothing. Jake's voice stayed calm. We're just passing through, the second man smirked. Looks like you picked yourself up a pretty traveling partner. Jake's jaw tightened, but he didn't reach for his gun. I said we're just passing through. The first man laughed, looking at Tala. She don't talk much, does she? Before Jake could reply, Tala spoke up, her tone sharp and fearless. I speak only to those worth my words. The man's smile vanished. He muttered something under his breath, but Jake stepped forward slightly, his hand resting on his belt. That's enough. You've said your piece. The silence stretched between them. Then the 2 men exchanged glances, turned their horses and rode away, throwing dust into the wind. When they were gone, Tala looked at Jake. You didn't draw your gun. He shrugged. Sometimes words stop bullets before they start. She nodded slowly, a hint of admiration in her eyes. You're not like most white men I have met. Jake smiled faintly. That's good to hear. They continued riding until the sun began to drop low again, painting long shadows across the land. The colors of the desert changed from gold to deep red, then purple. Jake found a small canyon with shelter from the wind. They decided to make camp there for the night. As the fire crackled, Tala sat quietly, watching the flames. The day had tested both of them. She thought about how the traders had looked at her, like she didn't belong. It was something she had felt her whole life. But tonight something felt different. She wasn't alone in the feeling. Jake sat on the other side of the fire, cleaning his saddle strap. You handled yourself well today, he said. She looked at him. So did you. Most men try to prove their strength by showing it. Jake chuckled. Maybe I'm just too tired to show off. She smiled softly. Or maybe you understand that true strength is quiet. They shared a moment of silence, the firelight reflecting in their eyes. Then Tala began humming a soft tune, a melody from her people. The song was gentle, like the sound of water moving over stones. Jake listened without speaking. The music filled the night, making the desert feel alive. When she finished, he said, That was beautiful. What does it mean? It's a song of safe return, she said. My mother used to sing it before I traveled. Jake nodded. Then I hope it brings us both back safe. She looked across the fire. Do you always travel alone? Mostly, Jake said. I used to work with ranchers and miners, but I didn't fit in. Folks don't trust quiet men. Tala thought about that. Maybe they're afraid of what quiet men see. Jake smiled. Maybe you're right. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of dry sage and distant rain. The fire crackled softly. They both looked toward the dark horizon where lightning flickered far away. A storm was forming. We should rest early, Jake said. The trail might be rough tomorrow. Tala nodded, wrapping herself in a blanket. She looked at him before lying down. Thank you for today, she said simply. Jake tipped his hat. You're welcome. As she drifted to sleep, he sat awake for a while thinking. He had met many people on the trail, but none like her, strong, proud, and unafraid to speak her mind. There was something about Tala that stirred something deep inside him, a kind of respect he hadn't felt in years. He looked at the stars and whispered to himself, You're something else, Miss Tala. When dawn arrived, the rain had passed far to the north, leaving the air cool and fresh. Jake saddled the horse and woke her gently. She blinked at the rising sun, her hair loose and shining in the light. Ready to ride? He asked. She nodded, smiling slightly. Let's see if your cowboy legs can keep up. Jake laughed. You'll see I don't quit easy. Together. They set out once again, the open land stretching before them. Two different souls traveling the same road, still strangers in many ways, yet slowly learning to trust the rhythm of each other's hearts. The morning sun rose bright and strong, warming the rocky path as Jake Turner and Tala rode deeper into the wild land. The wind was gentle now, carrying the fresh scent of rain from the storm that had passed during the night. The sky stretched endlessly above them, blue, wide, and open, as if it watched their every move. Jake rode in silence, thinking about how strange this journey had become. He had set out alone, expecting nothing more than a quiet ride to the next town. Yet here he was, guiding a proud native, woman through a land filled with danger and history, a woman who had challenged his every word and made him question things he had long believed about people and trust. Tala sat tall on the horse, her eyes scanning the horizon. She looked tired but determined. Her tribe's land was not far now. By nightfall, she said softly, we should see the river that guards my people. Jake smiled. Good, I'm sure they'll be happy to see you. Tala nodded but said nothing more. There was worry in her eyes, a quiet, hidden fear about what might happen when she returned. The world she belonged to had rules, and bringing back a cowboy, even one who had saved her, could cause trouble. As the sun climbed higher, they came to a wide valley where a river twisted through the sand like a silver snake. It was swollen from the rain, the water rushing fast and wild. The path across was broken, but it was the only way forward. Jake stopped his horse and studied it carefully. That current's strong, he said. We'll have to lead the horses together or they might get swept away. Tala looked at the water and shook her head. I've crossed rivers before. Not this one, Jake said firmly. You'll ride. I'll guide from the front. She frowned, unwilling to be treated like she couldn't handle herself. I can manage, Jake interrupted gently. I know you can, but two people working together is safer than one person trying to prove something. Tala looked at him for a long moment. Then with a quiet sigh, she agreed. She climbed on the horse and Jake took the reins. They entered the cold river slowly, the water splashing up against the horse's legs. The current tugged hard, pushing at them like invisible hands. Halfway across, a log floated past, bumping the horse and startling it. The animal reared suddenly, throwing Tala off balance. Before she could react, the strong current caught her, pulling her downstream. Tala! Jake shouted. Without a thought for himself, he dropped the reins and dove into the icy water. The shock of the cold hit him hard, but he fought through it, his arms pushing against the current. He saw her struggling, trying to grab a rock, but the water was too strong. Jake swam faster, every muscle burning. He reached her just as she began to slip under. Wrapping one arm around her waist, he kicked with all his strength, fighting to reach the shore. The current pulled at them like a living thing, refusing to let go. Finally, after what felt like forever, Jake's hand found a solid branch near the edge. He pulled them both out, gasping for breath, and fell onto the muddy ground. Tala coughed, water spilling from her mouth, her body shaking from the cold. You all right? Jake asked, his voice rough but gentle. Tala opened her eyes and nodded weakly. You didn't have to jump in, she said softly. Jake gave a tired smile. Maybe not, but I wasn't about to let the river take you. For a long moment, they just sat there, both breathing hard, the sound of the rushing water filling the silence. Then Tala turned her face away, embarrassed by how close she had come to death, and how much this man had risked for her. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. You could have drowned, Jake shrugged. I've been through worse. Besides, you're worth saving. Tala looked at him sharply, but there was no joke in his voice. His eyes were calm, steady, and kind. She didn't know what to say. They stayed by the river for an hour, resting and drying in the sun. Jake built a small fire to warm them, using the last bit of dry wood he carried. Tala watched the flames, her thoughts far away. Finally, she said, My people lost many things. Land, horses, even family. To men who looked like you. It's hard to forget that. Jake nodded slowly. I understand. I've seen what people can do when they stop seeing others as human. But that's not who I am. She studied his face, searching for lies, but found none. Why? She asked. Why are you different? Jake poked the fire with a stick, watching the sparks rise. Maybe because I've lost too. My brother died working a mine that cared more about gold than men. After that, I couldn't keep doing things the old way. I started walking my own path. Tala listened carefully. There was a quiet sadness in his words that she recognized, the kind that came from someone who had seen too much pain. After a while, she whispered, When I first saw you, I thought you would act like the others. I said those words. You would do what most white men do. I see now that I was wrong. Jake smiled softly. You had reason to think that way. You've seen the bad side of folks like me. Still, Tala said, her tone gentle now, I shouldn't have judged before I knew. The sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in soft orange and red. Jake packed up the fire and they prepared to move again. As they walked beside the horse, Tala said quietly, When we reach my people, you should not come too close. They will not trust you. I figured as much, Jake said, but I'll see you home safe. The path ahead was narrow, winding through tall cliffs. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. As they climbed higher, Tala began to tell him stories of her childhood, of running barefoot through the forest, of her father teaching her to track animals, of her mother's songs around the fire. Her voice grew softer as she spoke of her father being taken by soldiers when she was young. He never came back, she said quietly. Since then, I learned not to depend on kindness from strangers. Jake listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, Maybe kindness is rare, but it still exists. You just have to see it when it shows up. Tala looked at him with a small, thoughtful smile. Maybe you are right. They reached a high ridge where the view stretched for miles, golden hills rolling into deep valleys. The river they had crossed shimmered below them, winding like a silver ribbon through the land. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It's beautiful, Jake said softly. Tala nodded. It is our heart. Everything we are comes from this land, Jake understood. He had no land like this to call his own. For him, home was wherever his horse stopped for the night. As the stars began to appear, they made camp on the ridge. The night air was cool, and the sound of crickets filled the quiet. Tala sat beside the fire, her hair glowing in the firelight. She glanced at Jake and said, When I return, my people will not let you stay. They will see your skin and decide what you are before you even speak. Jake smiled sadly. Wouldn't be the first time someone's done that. Tala sighed. I wish things were different. So do I, he said. For a long time, they just watched the fire burn. Tala finally broke the silence. You said your brother made that carving you keep on your saddle? Jake nodded, pulling it out. A small wooden charm shaped like a running horse. He carved it before he left for the mines. Said it would bring luck. Tala reached out gently, touching it with her fingers. It's simple but strong, she said. Like you. Jake smiled, then looked at her closely. You're not as stubborn as you think, Tala. Her eyes sparkled with amusement. Don't tell anyone, she whispered. It would ruin my reputation. They both laughed quietly, the sound blending with the soft night wind. For the first time since they met, the space between them felt easy. Not filled with suspicion or pride, but something new. Later, when Tala lay down to rest, Jake stayed awake, watching the stars. He thought about what she had said, about loss, about judgment, about trust. Maybe the world had drawn a line between them, but out here, under the same sky, that line didn't seem to matter anymore. When he finally closed his eyes, the thought that drifted through his mind was simple and peaceful. Some people meet by chance, but maybe some meetings are meant to heal old wounds. And somewhere in her sleep, Tala murmured a word in her own language, a word that meant safe. They were both beginning to understand that this journey wasn't just about getting home. It was about learning what it meant to see a person not for where they came from, but for who they truly were. The next morning began with a thin mist covering the valley. The sky was pale blue and the smell of wet grass filled the cool air. Jake Turner woke early, his eyes scanning the ridge before the first light fully broke. He saw Tala standing near the edge of the hill, her blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her hair moving softly in the wind. She looked peaceful yet distant, as if her thoughts were somewhere far beyond the horizon. Jake got up quietly and stirred the ashes of the campfire back to life. "We'll reach your village today," he said after a moment. Tala turned, her dark eyes calm but thoughtful. "Yes, my people will be waiting," she said softly, "but they will not expect me to arrive with you." Jake nodded. "I figured that." There was no anger in her voice, only concern. She wasn't ashamed of him. She was worried for him. The line between their worlds was old and heavy, and both knew crossing it could bring trouble. They packed their things in silence and mounted the horse. The land below was greener now, scattered with trees and wildflowers. The closer they got to the river valley, the more signs of life appeared. Smoke rising from a distant campfire, the soft echo of a drum carried by the wind. Tala's heart beat faster. She was almost home. By midday, they rode through a narrow pass where the rocks glowed red under the sun. Birds flew overhead and the sound of rushing water grew louder. Then far below, Jake saw it. A cluster of small huts made from wood and clay surrounded by fields and horses. It was a beautiful sight, full of color and movement. Children played near the river and women were gathering herbs near the edge of the forest. Tala's face softened as she saw her home. "There," she said, pointing. "That is my village." Jake smiled faintly. "It's a fine place." But as they rode down the path, he noticed two riders coming fast toward them. The men wore leather vests and carried bows across their backs. Their faces were stern, their eyes sharp. They were scouts from her tribe. When they reached the two travelers, one of the men raised his hand. "Stop," he said in a firm voice. "Who is this man with you, Tala?" Tala straightened in her saddle. "He is the one who helped me," she said clearly. "I was in an accident. He saved me from the river." The men exchanged doubtful looks. One of them frowned. "A white cowboy? You bring him here?" Jake kept his hat low, not wanting to cause trouble. "I'm not here to bother anyone," he said calmly. "Just wanted to see her home safe." The second man glared at him. "Your kind has done enough to our people." Tala's tone turned sharp. "Enough! He is not like the others. I owe him my life." Her words silenced them for a moment. The scouts looked uneasy but nodded reluctantly. "Your mother will want to see you," one said. "But he should wait outside the village," Jake agreed quietly. "That's fine by me." As they rode the last stretch, Tala could see the people gathering at the edge of the village. The air was filled with curiosity and caution. Some of the women covered their mouths in surprise. Her mother, Naya, came running forward, her eyes wet with relief. She wrapped Tala in her arms and whispered prayers of thanks. "My child," Naya said softly, "we thought the fire had taken you." Tala smiled faintly. "It almost did, but this man saved me." She turned and gestured toward Jake, who stood beside his horse, silent and respectful. The crowd grew quiet. Jake could feel their eyes on him, full of suspicion and pain. To them, he was not just a stranger. He represented a history of broken promises and loss. One of the elders stepped forward. His hair was gray, his face lined with age and wisdom. "You brought him here," he said to Tala. "Do you trust him?" "I do," she replied firmly. "He risked his life to save mine." The elder studied Jake for a long moment, then spoke in a calm voice. "Then he has done a good thing. But this is not his place. He should leave before the sun sets." Jake nodded politely. "I understand, sir." Before he could turn to go, Tala stepped forward quickly. "Wait," she said. She reached into her pouch and pulled out the small carved wooden charm Jake's brother had made, the one he had shown her by the fire. She held it up for everyone to see. "This," she said, "is a gift from him. He carries it not as a weapon or pride, but as a memory. You see a stranger. I see a man who showed me mercy when the world gave none." The people murmured quietly. Tala's words carried weight, and even her mother looked at Jake differently now. Jake shifted awkwardly, unused to such attention. "Ma'am," he said softly to Naya, "your daughter's strong. She didn't need saving, just someone to ride beside her a while." Naya smiled faintly. Then may the spirits bless your road, cowboy. Jake tipped his hat. Thank you, ma'am. Still, he knew it was time to go. He walked to his horse and tightened the saddle. Tala followed him. You're really leaving? She asked. Jake nodded. It's better this way. I don't belong here. Her eyes softened. You could stay near the river for a few days. The land there is open, he smiled. If I stay, I'll bring you trouble. Your people need peace, not questions. Tala looked down, her voice quiet. You talk like a man who's always leaving. Jake looked out toward the hills. Maybe that's all I know how to do. She stepped closer, her voice trembling slightly. Then take something to remember this place. She reached into her pouch and pulled out a small feather, white at the tip and brown at the base. From an eagle, she said. It means protection. Jake took it carefully. Thank you, he said softly. I'll keep it close. Before he mounted his horse, the elder approached again. Cowboy, he said, you may not belong to our tribe, but you have shown honor. Remember that the land sees what men forget. Jake nodded deeply. I'll remember. He climbed onto his horse and turned toward the open plains. Tala watched him, her heart heavy. She wanted to say something, to tell him that his kindness had changed her view of the world, but the words stuck in her throat. As he began to ride away, she called out, Jake! He stopped and turned back. Thank you, she said simply. Jake smiled faintly, just doing what was right. The crowd slowly returned to their daily tasks, but Tala remained standing there, watching the cowboy disappear into the sunlit horizon. Her mother touched her shoulder gently. You trust him deeply, she said quietly. Tala nodded. He showed me that not all men are ruled by the past. Naya smiled. Then maybe his path and yours were meant to cross, even if just for a while. That evening, Tala sat near the river watching the sky turn orange and pink. The wind carried the smell of smoke from cooking fires and the sound of children laughing. Yet her thoughts were with the man riding alone across the plains. Jake, meanwhile, rode until the village lights faded behind him. He stopped near a group of hills where the stars began to appear. Taking out the small feather, he looked at it in the fading light. It glowed softly against his rough hands. He smiled to himself and whispered, Safe travels, Tala. Then he tucked the feather into his hat and looked up at the night sky. Somewhere out there, he knew she was looking at the same stars. Both of them had lived through different worlds. Yet for a short time, those worlds had met, and something good had come from it. The cowboy rode on, his heart lighter than before. The land stretched endless before him, but this time it didn't feel empty. He had found something rare in a wild land, understanding, and that was more precious than gold. And as the stars grew brighter, the wind carried a soft sound through the desert, a gentle song in Tala's voice far away, singing of safe return and the kind stranger who rode into her life when the world seemed lost. The days after Jake Turner left the village passed slowly for Tala. Though she was back home and safe among her people, her heart felt oddly restless. She helped her mother gather herbs, taught children to weave baskets, and tended to her uncle, who had finally begun to recover. Yet every evening, when the sun touched the horizon and the sky turned gold, she found herself looking toward the open plains, the same direction where the cowboy had disappeared. Sometimes she told herself it was foolish. Their paths had crossed only by chance, but deep inside, she knew something in that journey had changed her. Jake had not spoken many words, yet his actions had said everything. He treated her not as someone beneath him, not as a stranger, but as an equal. That memory stayed with her like a quiet song in her heart. One morning, as the tribe prepared for a small celebration, a feast to thank the spirits for the harvest, Tala sat by the river washing herbs. The air was warm, and the sound of running water calmed her thoughts. Then she saw something half buried near the bank, a familiar wooden carving shaped like a running horse. Her eyes widened, she picked it up, brushing away the sand. It was Jake's charm, the one his brother had made. He must have dropped it before leaving. She held it gently, her heart pounding. It felt like the land itself was giving her a sign. She looked up toward the distant plains and whispered softly, "Maybe this isn't the end." That evening, Tala made a decision. She packed a small satchel with dried meat, herbs, and water. When her mother noticed, she asked, "Where are you going, my daughter?" Tala met her eyes with quiet courage. "There is something I must return. A promise I must keep." Her mother smiled knowingly. The cowboy? Tala nodded slowly. He left part of himself behind. Naya placed a gentle hand on her cheek. Then go. But remember, sometimes returning something is also finding what you didn't know you'd lost. At dawn, Tala mounted her horse and began riding west, following the familiar trail she had once taken in fear and pain. But this time her heart was lighter. The land seemed to greet her like an old friend, the wind whispering through the grass, the birds flying overhead, the same river glimmering beneath the morning light. After half a day of riding, she reached a wide stretch of open plain, where the hills rolled gently into the distance. There, she spotted a small campfire burning faintly near a cluster of rocks. A horse was tied nearby. Her heart leapt. Jake was there, sitting cross-legged by the fire, sharpening a small knife. His hat was tilted low, but when he looked up, surprise filled his face. "Tala," he said, standing quickly. "I didn't expect to see you here." She smiled softly and held out the wooden charm. "You dropped this by the river." Jake blinked in surprise, then laughed lightly. "Guess I did. Seems like the land wanted you to find it." Tala stepped closer. Maybe the land wanted you to see me again. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them felt warm and still, filled with unspoken thoughts. Jake finally said, "You didn't have to ride all this way just for that?" Tala smiled gently. "I didn't do it just for that." Jake looked at her carefully, noticing the calm strength in her eyes. "How's your uncle?" "He's healing," she replied. "The medicine worked. My people are safe." "That's good to hear," Jake said, nodding. He looked at the wooden carving and then at her. "You know, that charm was supposed to bring luck." "Maybe it worked." Tala tilted her head. "Luck or something stronger?" Jake chuckled softly. "Maybe both." They sat down near the fire, and for a while they shared stories of the days since they parted. Tala told him about her village and how she had defended him before the elders. Jake listened quietly, his heart touched by her courage. Then he told her about his journey after leaving, how he had found work fixing fences for a nearby ranch and how the land always seemed quieter than before. "You ever think about settling somewhere?" she asked. Jake poked at the fire with a stick. "Sometimes. But every time I think I've found a place, the road calls me again. I guess I'm built for moving on." Tala looked at him carefully. "And if someone gave you a reason to stay?" Jake smiled faintly. "That would be different." They both looked into the flames, each lost in thought. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was peaceful, like the quiet after a long storm. As the sun began to sink, turning the sky orange and purple, Tala stood. "I should head back before nightfall," she said softly. Jake nodded, though something inside him didn't want her to go. "I'll ride with you a little way," he offered. They rode side by side across the plains, the fading sunlight painting everything in gold. The air smelled of sage and dust, and the sound of hooves echoed like a heartbeat in the quiet evening. When they reached a ridge overlooking the valley, Tala stopped. Below them, the river glimmered like silver in the fading light. She turned to him and said, "Jake, when I first met you, I thought I knew what kind of man you were. I said those words, 'You would do what most white men do.' But I was wrong. You showed me there are hearts that still listen, even when the world tries to silence them." Jake looked down for a moment, then met her eyes. "And you showed me something too. You taught me that strength doesn't mean standing alone. It means standing for what's right even when it's not easy." Tala smiled. "Then maybe we both learned what we were meant to." The wind picked up, brushing through her hair. The sky was turning deep red now, the kind of color that made the land look alive. Jake took off his hat, holding it to his chest. "You'll do fine, Tala. You've got fire in you, the kind that can light up a dark world." She laughed softly. "And you've got the calm of a man who knows when to fight and when to walk away." They both sat quietly for a while, watching the last light fade from the horizon. Then Tala said, "You'll keep that feather I gave you?" Jake touched the white-tipped feather tucked in his hat. "Always. And I'll keep your brother's carving," she said, holding it close. "Maybe one day it'll remind me that good men still walk this land." Jake looked at her for a long moment. "If you ever find yourself in trouble again," he said gently, "light a fire near the ridge at night." "I'll come if I can." Tala smiled, her eyes shining softly. "Then I hope I never have to light it. But it's good to know someone would come." The sun disappeared completely, leaving a trail of pink and gold in the sky. It was time. Jake knew she needed to return to her people, and he needed to keep moving. He held out his hand. "Take care of yourself, Tala." She looked at his hand, then reached out and clasped it firmly. "And you, Cowboy. Don't forget that kindness is also a kind of courage." Jake's eyes softened. "I won't." They let go slowly, both understanding that some meetings were meant to stay in memory, not because they ended, but because they left something that would last forever. Tala rode down the trail toward her village, the sound of her horse fading into the distance. Jake watched until she disappeared into the darkening valley. Then he looked up at the stars, brighter now than ever. He whispered to himself, "Safe roads, Tala." As the night deepened, Jake set up camp by the fire once more. The wooden charm hung from his saddle, and the feather stayed tucked in his hat. The two small gifts, one from him, one from her, were proof that even across worlds divided by history, understanding could grow like a single flower in the desert. The wind blew softly, carrying with it a faint sound almost like singing. Jake smiled as he recognized the tune. It was her voice again, carried far by the wind, singing that same gentle song she had sung by the fire days ago, the song of safe return. He leaned back, eyes on the stars, and said quietly, "You fight the current differently, Tala." And in that moment, both the cowboy and the stubborn native woman were bound by something no river or distance could wash away: respect, kindness, and the shared belief that the world could still be better if hearts learned to listen. The plains stretched endless and quiet around him, but for the first time in a long while, Jake Turner didn't feel alone. The fire crackled softly and the wind carried peace through the night, a promise kept between two souls who had met where courage and compassion crossed paths under the wide, eternal sky.